Shineless sat in her rocking chair looking out at the waterfall across the lake, while holding on to a sleeping Infinigan youngling. She looked up through the dome overhead, watching as the moisture beaded up and dripped down in waves under the star-filled sky outside. She sighed and looked down at her wrist slate. She used her eyes to scroll through it for the 10th time, rereading the lawsuit one of the Margot houses had brought against her husband. It outlined in detail the crystal manufacturing methods Dam had his factory misusing and was claiming copyright infringement. She hugged the small child in her arms as she read it. They had a case. All his methods he had spied and dealt under tables to get. Now that they were joining the Clouder, the Margot had legal recourse. Sparrow, her world, her home, her family's home, may be in jeopardy. She got up and walked the child inside. She put the small Infinigan in its crib, its forearms spreading out, reaching as it yawned. She smiled at it for a moment. She turned and walked out of the nursery, pausing at the door to the hallway. She looked over her menagerie of babies. She turned of the hallway light, shutting the door behind her. Shineless woke up early and began the breakfast routine. Her resident grazers woke up at the same time and started preparing the children for the day. Shineless and 2 others were making salads and stews for the children. One of the Craddock security officers walked through the house, his large feet thumping as he stepped into the kitchen. "Ma'am." Shineless looked up from the salad she was preparing. "Yes, Gantuck." A ship was cleared and landed at the pad outside the dome. "You have guests wishing to see you." "I don't remember anyone scheduled." "Who are they?" Gantuck raised up one of his smaller lower left underarm. A holographic image was projected out from his wrist device. Shineless smiled as she watched the image of her nephew waiting outside the bay doors as he talked with 2 other people. "Langdon!" She smiled at Gantuck. "Let him in." "And the 2 with him?" the Craddock soldier asked. "They're friends. Bring them up to the house." She looked at her helpers. "Ready 3 extra plates. He'll probably want meat. Minimal greens." The grazers looked up, nodding. Shineless darted upstairs to change. She waited for the opportune moment and descended the staircase in her favorite Infinigan-styled coveralls and green-spectacled goggles. She smiled down at Langdon. He smiled back up at her. "Hey, Auntie." Shineless, a head shorter than him, head-butt his shoulder as they entered a hug. "How you been?" "You clear of trouble?" He looked up and groaned. In and out, I guess." She punched him in the same shoulder and then looked at his 2 friends. She stopped still as she took in the towering figure behind him. It appeared like a human female, but she knew instinctively it wasn't. The shrouded face under the hat, the eggshell dress, and the dozens of insectile machine legs poking out from underneath gave Cammy away. Shineless straightened up. "Hello, Cammy. What brings you here?" Langdon cleared his throat. She's a friend." He also put his hand behind his girlfriend's back and moved her toward Shineless. "This is Ruth Bergens." Shineless shifted her gaze and took in the young woman. "Nice to meet you, Ruth." Ruth bowed her head slightly. "Nice to meet you too, ma'am. I've heard lots about you." Shineless lifted her goggles and turned back to Cammy. "No, seriously. Why are you here? You just don't show up places." Cammy looked over at Langdon. "He asked me to accompany him. We have become good friends as of late, and I figured it may be nice to partake of some human family functions." Shineless turned and punched Langdon in the same spot again. "Well, get in here. I got the girls making us breakfast." Shineless had her goggles up in her hair, so Cammy would be certain to see her eyes as she glared at her. She took a bite of salad and stared at the android while she chewed. Ruth took a drink to clear her mouth and broke the silence. "It's a lovely place you have here. I haven't seen anywhere this beautiful before." The dozens of faces looked at the young woman. Shineless slid her eyes over to her. "Thank you." "Damn, and I made it ourselves." "Well, with Erebus, of course." Cammy paused as she raised a bite of fried fish to her mouth. "Of course. How is your AI friend?" "He appears absent at the moment." Shineless slid her eyes back to glare at Cammy. "He's currently focused on projects with Dam." "Ah," Cammy said as she put the fish into her sharp-toothed mouth. Langdon sat his fork down. "Auntie, I actually came here to talk to you about something." Shineless slowly blinked and looked at him. "Of course you did." Langdon raised a hand above the edge of the table. "It's nothing bad. We actually came to help." "Came to help with what?" she asked. Langdon looked at Cammy and nodded. Cammy began to unbutton the front of her dress, revealing her synthetic flesh underneath. Her hands splayed open, and several mechanical prods poked out and into her chest. The skin slid back and a compartment opened up, revealing a purple crystal. Cammy reached in and pulled it out as several tether lines hissed free. Langdon looked at his aunt. Cammy and I figured out the process and refined it. Shineless stared at the processing crystal. She pointed. You're making them too? Langdon shook his head. No, that's the thing. We're not making them. You are. Shineless looked over at him. That looks different than us. What's it running at? Cammy looked down at the purple crystal in her hand as she slid it back into her chest. She looked up at Shineless as it retethered itself. It is tens of times more capable than the Margot models. How? When? Shineless asked. Ruth started. Langdon and I have been pretty close with the Margot for a while. We may have gotten a hold of most of their methodology. Langdon smiled. That, and with collaborating with Cammy here, we improved on it. Shineless shook her head. I don't understand. Langdon reached over and touched her hand. That crystal, the new methods, we're not going to patent them. He stared at her for a moment and smiled. You are? Shineless took a moment for the thought to register. The lawsuit. Langdon nodded. Yup. Ruth, staring out the window at the lake, spoke up. We couldn't let you risk your home. Imagining this world become a smoke-filled Margot den. Bleh. I hate to think about it. Shineless looked around at the children eating. Her Grazer sisters and Craddock brothers met her gaze as she looked around. Shineless looked back at Langdon. This is amazing. They won't have a case. They'll be out of the market. Cammy cut up another portion of fish. She looked up at the woman. The Margot will lose their control as orders dwindle. They will devolve into family squabbles. As the money dries up, several of the clans will be ousted from their homeworld, bereft and looking for work. Dam and Langdon both have working relations with most of the weaker houses, and will be able to levy them into joining with Sparrow and working at the factories on your system worlds. Shineless swallowed hard. You really thought this out? Cammy raised the portion up to her lips and paused. I think everything out. Ruth and Langdon went down to the lake to swim with a group of older children from the secondary houses. Cammy and Shineless sat on the porch in the rocking chairs. Shineless watched as Cammy's numerous legs found pits in the wood and pushed gently to move her back and forth. What is your endgame? Shineless asked. Same as you, same as I have always said. Cammy turned her head and looked at her. Help humanity flourish, to take care of them. That has always been my goal. Shineless nodded and looked out over the compound. There aren't many humans here. I don't limit myself to a singular species. Humans never have. What's that supposed to mean? Shineless asked. What do you think about dogs? Cammy asked. Dunno, I don't have any. Cammy shifted in her seat. You know what they are though, don't you? You have studied? Shineless nodded. I've seen them in zoos. Some travelers have had them. I know the Halung clans keep them. What's your point? Cammy shook her head. I'll have to retry. These other species you live with, do you see yourself as better than them? Shineless glared at her. Of course not. They are my friends, my family. Yet they treat you as if you are better than them. But I'm not. Cammy slowed her rocking. Yet you are. You and your husband have nurtured each of these people, given them work, given them life space. They exist because of you and your efforts. That doesn't mean we are better than them. We need them just as much as they need us, Shineless said. Cammy nodded. Exactly. The queen bee serves far more than she rules. What are you saying? Cammy paused to phrase her words, her legs locked. After a moment, she started moving again. I am saying humans, humanity, isn't isolated to a singular species. Your kind tie and entwine yourselves with everything you can, binding creatures and machines to your will. You grow and evolve with those beings. Cammy smiled as she watched the young creatures splashing in the lake. To take care of humanity is to aid humanity in developing those bonds. She turned and looked at Shineless. I wish to help you here on Sparrow grow more of those such bonds. How so? Shineless asked. You have a daughter preserver, do you not? Shineless nodded. Rainbow, what about her? Would you mind introducing us? I have an idea I would like to pitch to you two. Shineless paused. Tell me first. It was a short ride to Rainbow's lab via the pneumatic tubes. Shineless rang the facility door, and a small black and yellow preserver answered it. Hello, ma'am. Can I help you? We're here to see Rainbow, Shineless said. The young preserver bobbed and let Cammy and Shineless inside. The two followed through the entry into the main lab towers. Shineless looked around as dozens of preservers of various colors and sizes moved about carrying equipment. They took an elevator up and exited into a large room encapsulated in massive bay windows looking out over the entirety of that county's dome. Rainbow was waiting. "Hello, Mother. How are you?" Two of her eyes shifted onto Cammy, and the infamous Cammy. "How are you as well?" Shineless walked over to a stool and sat down. Rainbow followed her and stood next to the table. Cammy waited near the elevator, watching, observing the room. Shineless looked at her hands for a moment, and then looked up at Rainbow. "You've done well here. I'm impressed." Rainbow bobbed. "Thanks to you and Father." Shineless nodded. "Yeah, you've helped us build entire ecosystems here. You've filled quite a few domes for us. He loves all the bee varieties you send us." Rainbow shifted an eye toward Cammy. "What is going on, Mother?" Shineless took a breath. "Do you feel the compulsion like the other preservers?" "Compulsion?" "Yeah. Do you want to hoard DNA, hold it over everyone, barter it out, perform power plays and stuff?" Rainbow pivoted on her legs. "Well, yes, I have the genes that compel me to do that. It is inherent, tied to who and what we are as preservers. Well, the preserver on Twain obtained DNA and misused it. Well, he made Dam and I. So, I guess it wasn't a misuse, but he didn't have permission." "I don't know what I'm saying." Shineless looked Rainbow in the eyes. "Look, what would you do if you came into a selection containing a large number of human samples?" Rainbow shifted another eye over at Cammy, leaving one looking at her adoptive mother. "Your species is of great value. The small selection I have gives my gardens high ranking." "What are we talking about?" Shineless looked over at Cammy and then back at Rainbow. "She could do it. It would be trivial for her, but she has a bit of an image problem. She has a large collection of humans have warred with her for a long time, and every battle has pained her. She wants to atone." Rainbow pivoted a bit. "Atone how?" "She sifted the battlefields for centuries. She would like to start rebirthing the fallen. She doesn't have their memories then," Rainbow said. Shineless shook her head. "Were you wanting to fabricate some then? Give them a story, maybe some mental conditioning and skills?" Shineless shook her head. "No. Legitimate rebirthing, vat wombs, normal gestation. We raise them up." "How many are we talking about?" Rainbow asked. Cammy stepped closer to the two. 782,088,104. Rainbow spun about for a moment, her hands holding onto the table. That's a lot of humans. There, if anyone found out, the preserver would flip out." He would. Cammy put a hand on her shoulder. "The preserver will do nothing. I offer this project to you, to Shineless, to this world, because it is perfectly suited to raise up humanity as it should be." Rainbow looked over at her mother. "What kind of time frame? We don't have the schools or facilities to raise that many." Shineless smiled. "Not yet. We will start with a few, at the house. Raise them up, and maybe if we are lucky, some may want to help us raise more." Rainbow focused her eyes on the two. "Well, that is a lot of humans." Cammy pulled over a stool and sat. Sadly, that was all I could recover. Shineless looked over the android as she slumped onto the table. "We'll take on the task." Cammy, still looking down at the table, put her hand on Shineless's hand. "I thank you. It couldn't be me." Shineless covered her hand, cupping it both of hers. "They'll do well here. Damn, and I will raise them right." Cammy rose back up and met Shineless's eyes. "I will leave Langdon and Ruth here with you to assist. His creations would do well here." "You talking about the gremlin AI he made?" Cammy nodded. "They need to grow, as will these children I have gifted you. They will do well together." Shineless looked at Rainbow and then back at Cammy. "We'll have to talk about that. Erebus needs to input on those things. I know he put up lots of walls to keep them out." Cammy smiled. "Talk it out. Talk about it with Langdon, with Erebus. You'll see as I do. They will be beneficial to the children." Rainbow raised her hands. "Well, sounds like I have to shift my clan's focus." She touched her chest device. "Clan meeting! Assemble in the Great Hall. We need to talk equipment and room assignments." Rainbow's hands fidgeted as she cantered away. Cammy watched as the preserver left the room. "I like them." "Preservers?" Cammy nodded. "Well, I'll upload the data to their drives." "That's all I needed here." She turned and looked at Shineless, extending a hand. "Thank you for this." Shineless took her hand. "The honor is mine." Susan was putting the final garnishes on the dessert when the door chimed. She looked up, hands full, and met eyes with Trish. "Do you mind?" Trish nodded, smiling. "I got him." Trish walked over and opened the door. Sam stepped in. "Oh, hey, Trish." He leaned over and hugged her, careful not to squish her. "Susan around?" "She's in there cooking." Sam smiled at her. "This is sweet of her," he said, and continued toward the kitchen. He stepped and laughed as he saw the spread. "Wow, you've been busy." Susan pointed at a dish covered in foil. "Pop that back in the oven. I don't want it cooling off before everyone gets here." Sam nodded, sniffing it. "What is it?" She paused as she was struggling with a jar and smiled at him. "Burger bird." Sam laughed. "From Vitalia? Oh, I love those." "I know," she said as she snapped the jar open. "Had it imported early quarter cycle." He closed the oven and set it to warm. "This is nice of you to do." She sat the jar on the counter and walked over and hugged him. "Need it done. I don't know when I'm going to see you again." He hugged her back, leaning into the top of her hair. "My little president. I don't know either. Maybe when I get back, you'll have a boyfriend to meet." She looked over, meeting eyes with Trish. She loosened her grip and looked up at her dad. "About that." Sam looked at her, then over at Trish. Trish shrugged. "Oh, how long you two been flatmates now?" Trish sighed. 2 years now." Sam laughed. "You got anything to drink?" Susan looked at Trish. Trish shook her head. "Nope, this is a sober house." Sam paused for a moment. "You got juice though, right?" Susan walked over to the fridge and pulled out a citrus blend. "Yes." She poured a glass for him. Trish, leaning in the doorway, stared at Sam. "So you're going away again? You seem to do that a lot." Sam nodded and took a sip. "Yeah, I guess I like going, seeing new things." Susan walked over to the second oven and pulled out a tray of potatoes. "You like risking your life a lot too," she said as she sat them on the counter. Sam walked over into the living room and looked out the large reinforced window. The apartment was in the penthouse of the Overland Suites, looking down into the Star Angel nesting grounds. "You have a great view from up here. You can see the young ones flashing." Trish walked up beside him. Susan watched from the kitchen, still prepping. Trish leaned toward the window, looking down. "Yeah, pretty. So you plan on going into the deep, not returning again?" "I don't plan on dying anymore." He looked over at her, pointing at his chin hair. "See any gray?" Trish looked, shrugging. "Dyeing your hair now." Susan issued a laughing shriek. "Dad, you're doing the treatments." Sam looked over into the kitchen. "Yeah, Mariposa talked me into it. We plan on going the long haul out there. See how many worlds we can prime." Susan pulled off her oven mitts and sat them next to the potatoes. She walked over to them by the window. "So you do plan on coming back sometime?" He smiled. "Eventually, yes. We will try and keep in contact, send regular updates, progress reports." Susan sighed, relaxing a bit. "Well, good. It isn't a goodbye then. This is going to be a Thanksgiving." Sam smiled at her. Trish continued staring down at the Star Angel nest. "You know I don't like that term." Susan turned and walked back into the kitchen. "New Thanksgiving. The one where we all eat, relax, and be thankful, not the twisted old American kind." Sam shrugged and sipped his juice. "College stuff, I guess." Trish looked up at him. "Yes, human history. Delegated the halls of Twain College." The door chime rang again, and Susan answered. She greeted her younger sisters with a hug and let them in. She paused, noticing their guests. Marian and Etta raised their hands simultaneously. "Hi," they both said. Susan smiled and waved them in. Come in, come in. We got more than enough food." Sam walked over and hugged his daughters. "How are my newsgirls?" Clara pushed him back, smiling. "Oh my God, Dad! The Trojans gave us backstage passes to their concert this week. They want us to film from stage side." Sam nodded. "That sounds nice. You're doing well then." Jean leaned into her dad. "Yeah, thank you for hooking us up." He squeezed her with his right arm. "You're welcome. You two liking the new apartment?" Jean and Clara looked at each other. "We actually got separate apartments. Same building, though," Clara said. Sam reached around her and pulled her back into a hug with his left. "Getting on each other's nerves?" Jean nodded. Clara poked her. "You're the filthy one." Jean huffed. "You're the bossy one." Clara slapped her hair. Jean reacted quickly, stomping on her sister's shoe. Sam abruptly knelt down and picked both of them up on his shoulders. Clara kicked in the air. Susan laughed from the kitchen. "You're back, Dad." He laughed as he spun his daughters around the living room. "The air are miracle workers, Susie. Don't worry about me." Jean reached down and tickled Sam under his arm, causing him to drop her. Jean hit the floor and abruptly punched Sam behind the right knee. He fell down, still holding Clara. Clara pivoted in his grip and landed her feet behind him, pulling his arm into a hold while reaching around his throat, arcing his head up. Jean punched him twice in the side and then grappled him as well. Sam, immobile, opened his palms. "You two got me." Clara leaned down and kissed her dad on the forehead. "You lose." Across the room, a pregnant Olivia and Thomas stepped in through the front door. Olivia looked at them and shook her head. "Susie, smells good in here." Thomas, his hands loaded with gifts, walked over to Trish. "Where can I put these?" Trish looked over the bags and pointed to a corner of the dining room. "We weren't really doing gifts, but you can set them in there." Thomas shrugged. "Thought this was Thanksgiving." Olivia sat on a stool, watching Susan finish the last of the preparations. "So, no, Langdon." Sam and the twins stepped in through the kitchen doorway. Clara punched her dad in the gut and walked over to sit beside Olivia. "Yeah, where's he at?" Susan looked across the room at Trish and then back at her sister. "Well, he's over on Sparrow with Auntie and Uncle Dan." Jean was hugging Sam and spoke up. "You been keeping in touch with him? He's staying out of trouble." Susan met Trish's eyes again. "Yeah, kind of. He's got a girlfriend." Sam nodded. "Yeah, Ruth. She's a good girl. Keeps him in line." Trish stepped in beside him. "Yeah, she might. But his other girl I worry about." Olivia looked up at Trish. "Other girl? Don't tell me he's screwing around on her. I liked her." Susan shook her head. "No, a Camibot has been traveling around with them." "Yeah, Cammy and those damn red AIs he made. She's taken an interest," Sam said. Thomas walked in through the back entrance to the kitchen. "Yeah, Cammy, that's kind of scary. Why didn't you stop her?" Sam looked over at him. "No need. She doesn't mean anyone harm." Thomas rolled his eyes and walked over to Olivia, draping an arm over her. "Yeah, tell that to the HUW. Her kind wiped them out. Nothing dangerous about her. Not at all. She doesn't mean anyone here any harm," Sam restated. "For now," Thomas said. "Who knows when she'll change her mind and consume us all." Susan lifted her hands up and started undoing her apron. "Food is ready. Everyone grab something and start fitting the table." Sam glared at Thomas and grabbed the bird. Sam, at the far end of the table, was plating cuts of meat on Jean's plate. Olivia, serving herself some of the vegetable medley, looked over at him. "So going into the unknown again." Sam looked up at her. "No, it's all observable. We have a course chartered, and probes have already been sent. Viable worlds are scouted, and Mariposa is already planning biospheres." Marion and Etta looked at each other. Marion leaned in. This is a big endeavor. The resource extraction plans, the infrastructure builds, and the life space development are going to revolutionize the Clouder. This will usher in a population explosion." Thomas, mouthful, pointed at her with a fork. "Yeah, explosion is right," he swallowed. "Given all that is probably out there, you're going into claimed worlds. Poking the bear, more like it." Jean laughed. "I saw the bears at the preservation. They're so cute. I wanted to poke them all." Clara shook her head. Susan, from the end of the table near the windows, lifted her head up and looked around the table. "You've gained the attention of the entire Clouder again, Dad. This is a big deal, you know that, right? This isn't going to be another disappearing act like you did with Vitalia, right?" Sam paused. "I was at a low point then." Thomas laughed. Olivia elbowed him. Susan continued. "You're okay now, though." "You're not low again." Sam shook his head. "No, doing quite well, actually. I got a good crew lined up. I have a few good friends coming along. It's going to be good. Probably a few casks of whiskey as well," Thomas said under his breath. Trish glared at him. Sam leaned back. "Oh, you know what? I do like my drink. I take care of myself, though. I'm jogging again. I'm hiring a therapist for the ship to monitor everyone's, including my own mental health. You know, Susan, you're absolutely right. This is a big deal, for me, for everyone. All I ever wanted is everyone here to be taken care of, safe as I can possibly make it." He looked over at Thomas. "Tell me, Tom, you're a refugee yourself, aren't you?" Thomas met his eyes. Yes, I am. First armored of the Dionysian fleet. Watched the fall of Australia. Watched a dozen ships vaporized before we were forced to flee downstream. Here, Sam finished a bite of bird breast. Renounced your ties to the old regimes, didn't you? Settled here, amongst the enemy. Oliva hit the table. Cut the testosterone bullshit. We're here to wish you well before you leave, you asshole. Sam lowered his head a bit. Sorry. Thomas patted her hand. I'm sorry too, dear. Sam looked around at everyone. I'm sorry for all I've put you all through over the years. He looked over at Susan. None of you have to worry. This is a good trip. It's a chance for growth. For me. For everyone. Susan picked up her glass of juice. Well, I wish you well, Dad. I love you. Clara picked up her glass. We love you. Everyone around the table picked their glasses up. Even Thomas. Susan smiled across the table at Sam. To Dad, safe travels, and come home to us. Sam tried to not cry, but a tear escaped down his cheek.